What if your thoughts were not entirely your own? In the anxious dawn of the Cold War, American officials seriously entertained that possibility. Pilots appeared in enemy newsreels confessing to crimes they had not committed. Prisoners of war recited careful scripts with unsettling composure. Newspapers amplified a new term, brainwashing, that made fear sound scientific. Within that climate, the Central Intelligence Agency authorized a portfolio of secret experiments meant to probe the mind's weak points and map the levers of influence. The program's sterile label hid its ambition, MK-Ultra. The premise was stark. If the mind is a system, perhaps the system can be disrupted, rewritten, and compiled again with different priorities. If loyalty is learned, perhaps it can be unlearned. If memory is pliable, perhaps suggestion can be folded into it. In 1953, CIA Director Allen Dulles placed the effort under the control of Sidney Gottlieb, a quiet chemist who ran the technical services staff. He specialized in the practical magic of espionage, gadgets, disguises, toxins, and MK-Ultra became his most audacious brief. It did not grow like a single tree. It spread like ivy, sending tendrils into universities, hospitals, prisons, and private institutes, each labeled as a subproject with just enough description to be plausible and not enough to be clear. Front organizations laundered funds. Intermediaries concealed who was asking the questions. Some professors understood they were working on problems of national security. Others received vague briefs about perception and behavior. Consent often blurred. Volunteers signed paperwork that hid crucial details. Patients were told that experimental procedures might help them, and prisoners were offered incentives they could hardly refuse. Even when signatures existed, the information was partial and the power imbalance overwhelming. LSD quickly became the signature instrument, not because it was tidy or predictable, but because it was powerful. In small doses, it could shift mood and time. In larger ones, it could pull a person far from the shoreline of ordinary consciousness. Could that instability be guided toward confession? Could a public breakdown be engineered to discredit an enemy agent? Could a suggestion settle more easily in a mind that had lost its anchors? These were operational questions. MK-Ultra did not confine itself to clinics. The agency established safehouses with one-way glass and hidden microphones, places where civilians were dosed without warning and observed like unwitting actors. Elsewhere, in psychiatric wards and prison wings, research blurred into exploitation. Records hid harm behind antiseptic terms, behavioral observation, non-therapeutic series, while the people described in those phrases stumbled through panic, memory gaps, and lingering distrust of their own perceptions. The program's ethic lagged far behind its ambition, and the nation would not learn that until much later. MK-Ultra did not appear from nothing. It evolved from earlier inquiries named Bluebird and Artichoke that explored hypnosis, sleep disruption, and drugs that might loosen tongues during interrogation. Under Gottlieb, the lens widened, the aim shifted from extracting information to reshaping minds. The agency funded work on psychochemicals, post-hypnotic suggestion, sensory manipulation, bright light exposure, sleep deprivation, and electroshock regimens that stretched well beyond ordinary therapeutic use. Grants flowed through innocuous-sounding foundations. Proposals used the language of behavioral science while avoiding the word control. LSD sat at the center, but many compounds orbited it: psilocybin and mescaline, scopolamine and barbiturates, stimulant-sedative combinations designed to confuse judgment and open a window for suggestion. Researchers mapped dose curves and peak windows, logged paranoia and euphoria, and noted how expectations shaped experience. The same amount might feel like a whisper to one subject and a thunderclap to another. Across notebooks, a principle emerged: minds are different, results are unstable. Leverage, if it exists, is probabilistic, not absolute. Field trials pushed the envelope. In agency safehouses, hidden microphones captured conversations after spiked drinks. Sex workers were paid to bring clients and then step out while the dose took hold. Technicians watched through glass, pencil scratching as if they were logging weather instead of people. Outside those rooms, unwitting dosing occurred at social gatherings and even at a retreat for government scientists, a choice that would echo in tragedy. Inside hospitals and prisons, volunteers lacked meaningful power to refuse. Environment proved as potent as chemistry. Sensory deprivation tanks and padded rooms stripped reality to monotone, erasing clocks until minutes blurred into hours and hours into fear. After sufficient isolation, a gentle script could feel like rescue, and a suggestion could sound like a lifeline. Bright light and constant noise dissolved time. Sleep deprivation sanded down skepticism. Hypnotists worked to implant post-hypnotic cues, words, tones, gestures meant to trigger moods, amnesia, or small actions days later. Electroconvulsive techniques were pushed toward depatterning, the hope that erasing enough structure would make room to write something new. Results were inconsistent. Some subjects became suggestible, others grew defiant. Some remembered nothing, others remembered too much. Failures accumulated in private while funding justified further attempts. Within headquarters, the moral arithmetic stayed the same. Measured risk to individuals was outweighed by potential strategic gain. In an adversarial world, officials argued, not to explore these methods was to fall behind an opponent who would explore them without restraint. The logic of necessity carried the day, and it would take years to dislodge it. Every covert system leaves fingerprints. MKUltras appeared as shell foundation checks, as memoranda stamped with code numbers, and as human lives bent around events they could not explain. The most famous fingerprint belonged to Frank Olson, an Army scientist who worked with biological materials. In November 1953, he attended a small retreat with CIA colleagues. Without warning, Gottlieb added LSD to the group's drinks. Olson unraveled in the days that followed: insomnia, distress, doubts about the ethics of his work. A week later, he fell from a hotel window in New York and died. The official account called it suicide. Years later, as fragments of MKUltra surfaced, the government apologized for the dosing and offered a settlement to Olson's family, though many questions remained. Was he simply the casualty of reckless experimentation, or did he know too much about methods that were never meant to see daylight? Competing theories persist, but the undeniable core is this: unconsented dosing helped push a human being past his breaking point. Olson's death became a symbol of a program that routinely treated people as instruments. His case was not the only crack in the wall. Rumors circulated about one-way, mirror safehouses, about wards where aggressive electroshock erased more than depression, about graduate studies whose funding sources never aligned. Some academics balked when they learned who their patrons were. Others looked away, preferring ambiguity to complicity. Inside the agency, compartmentalization kept the full picture out of view. The logic of secrecy was self-sealing. Because the work was sensitive, it required silence. Because it was silent, abuses flourished. By the mid-1960s, cultural winds had shifted. Civil rights, activism, anti-war protest, and growing skepticism toward authority made it harder to imagine indefinite impunity. Gottlieb retired in 1972. The following year, as scandal convulsed Washington, senior officials ordered boxes of MKUltra files destroyed. The purge succeeded in clouding the record. What remained were ledgers, scattered summaries, and the testimony of people on the receiving end. For investigators yet to come, the absence of documents would be as telling as their presence. Even so, the outline of the machine could be reconstructed from what was left behind. There had been unwitting dosing. There had been field trials in clandestine rooms. There had been experiments that turned hospitals and prisons into laboratories for national security. There had been a sincere conviction in many offices that such work was the price of safety. The question that would finally reach the public square was simple to ask and hard to answer. Who decided that price, and who consented to pay it? In 1975, the United States Senate convened the Church Committee to investigate intelligence abuses. What its hearings revealed stunned the public. Domestic surveillance that skirted the law, assassination plots contemplated in dry memos, and the outline of a mind-focused program that sounded like fiction until witnesses and documents made it fact. Reporters filed Freedom of Information Act requests. Families of victims sought counsel. Scholars began assembling timelines from redacted pages and reluctant testimony. Agency officials conceded key points. LSD had been administered without informed consent. Safehouses existed where civilians were observed after covert dosing. Universities and hospitals had received funds through fronts that obscured the sponsor. Reforms followed. Executive orders narrowed what intelligence services could do on domestic soil. Federal research rules codified protections for human subjects and placed informed consent at the center rather than the margins. The Belmont Report, institutional review boards, and improved oversight did not erase the past, but they reshaped the future. Court cases moved in tandem. Some plaintiffs prevailed, others hit walls built of classification and missing files. Meanwhile, historians and journalists mapped MKUltra's reach. They identified subprojects testing sensory deprivation and hypnosis, prison programs that paired barbiturates with stimulants in truth serum cocktails, and psychiatric regimens that blasted patients with electroshock far beyond therapeutic boundaries in the name of depatterning. The conclusion was twofold. There was no reliable switch for obedience. There was, however, a reliable set of pressures: isolation, fatigue, fear, and pharmacology used as force multipliers. Those pressures echoed through later decades. Training on interrogation learned to avoid visible marks while maximizing leverage. Psychological operations explored how expectation and framing could steer perception. None of this required magic. It required method and a willingness to treat people as systems to be tuned. That habit is subtle and durable. It appears wherever institutions prize outcomes over rights, plausible deniability over consent, and speed over scrutiny. The public reckoning mattered for another reason. It demonstrated that democratic oversight, while slow and imperfect, can still force secrets into daylight. Journalism, litigation, and legislative inquiry accomplished what internal checks failed to do. The cost of delay was paid by people who never agreed to participate. The benefit, if we choose to take it, is a set of guardrails that keep urgency from becoming licensed the next time fear arrives with a new name. What remains of MKUltra today is less a manual than a warning. It cautions that national security urgency can rationalize almost anything, that classified budgets, if not audited by outsiders, expand until they cover practices nobody would defend in public, and that science, without ethical ballast, can be recruited into projects that betray its purpose. Those are not antique concerns, they are perennial temptations. The 21st century reframes the same questions. If the last era asked whether chemicals and hypnosis could bend the will, this era asks how algorithms, attention markets, and intimate data shape habit and belief. Influence at scale is woven into everyday life. Recommendation systems steer what we notice. Interfaces reward what we repeat. None of this equals mind control, but all of it blurs the boundary between guidance and manipulation. Vigilance here is not paranoia. It is the ordinary work of drawing bright lines around consent, agency, and transparency. Healthy systems add friction where harm might occur. In research, that means independent review boards, meaningful and informed consent written in plain language, and protocols that welcome scrutiny instead of treating it as a threat. In intelligence, it means clear legal authorities, oversight with teeth, and inspectors general who can say no without ending their careers. These mechanisms are tedious by design. They slow the slide. Every missing memo in MKUltra's archive argues for more documentation, not less. Every redaction argues for clearer public accounting the next time secret work touches human lives. There is also a human ledger beneath the policy talk. Victims of non-consensual dosing and extreme regimens were not case numbers. They were people whose sense of reality, already fragile in some instances, was treated as material. Some rebuilt their lives with time and support. Others carried fractures that did not show on scans but shaped their days. Families were left to guess how a night in a safe house or a series of treatments altered the person they loved. Ethics lives here, in the grain of experience, not merely in elegant rules. The good news is that lessons can be reclaimed. Psychopharmacology now proceeds under standards that center the patient. Neuroscience maps perception with humility about complexity. Clinical ethics is a profession, not an afterthought. Curiosity, when coupled with conscience, can illuminate rather than exploit. That coupling, ambition with accountability, is the real antithesis of MKUltra. The story of MKUltra does not end with a device that commandeers thought. It ends with a set of choices societies must make again and again. Secrecy magnifies error. Fear is a poor architect. Urgency tempts us to trade process for promise and to rename caution as weakness. The antidote is steadiness. methods that can survive inspection, records that can be audited, and a civic culture that rewards accountability instead of confusing it with disloyalty. Look closely at how the truth surfaced. It did not arrive as a voluntary confession. It arrived through journalism, lawsuits, congressional inquiry, and the stubborn patience of families who refused to let the record vanish. File destruction slowed the reckoning but could not erase it. Enough fragments remained to teach what needed teaching. Each time a researcher over-explains a study to ensure understanding, each time an oversight board demands revisions before approval, each time a legislator insists on narrower authorities with clearer reporting, the world that made MKUltra possible recedes a little further. The mind is not a code base that can be patched at will. It is a living weave of biology, memory, emotion, culture, and story. You can frighten it and numb it, you can disrupt it and tilt it. You can push choices toward a preferred outcome by narrowing options and saturating cues. But plasticity cuts both ways. The same flexibility that permits influence also permits recovery. People find language for what happened. Communities grow norms that protect the vulnerable. Law draws lines. History supplies examples that remind us why those lines exist. It is tempting to cast heroes and villains in hard edges. The reality is more useful and more unsettling, a spectrum of responsibility. Some designed experiments they knew violated ethics. Some kept distance from the mess and told themselves they were only studying phenomena. Some raised concerns and were ignored. Some refused to participate. The lesson for the present is practical. When a bright initiative arrives wrapped in urgency and vagueness, ask questions before momentum makes answers irrelevant. Who can opt out? Who can review from the outside? What happens to the data? What harm is plausible? And who will carry it if things go wrong? MKUltra tried to master the mind and failed, but its residue lingers. In rules that demand informed consent, in committees that ask aggravating questions, in the skepticism we bring to claims of necessity that arrive without details. The most durable protection for human thought is not a gadget or a doctrine. It is a habit of refusing to treat people as means when ends look bright and urgent. Each time we practice that habit, we honor those used in secret and choose a future where science and freedom stand on the same side.